Good evening, and thank you all for coming. Welcome to tonight's diplomatic discussion. I'm Barbara Stevenson, and I'm the Vice Provost for Global Affairs and Chief Global Officer here at Carolina. And it's wonderful to have you all with us here in the Nelson Mandela Auditorium. On April 9, 1949, representatives from 12 countries gathered in Washington, D.C. to sign the North Atlantic Treaty. The agreement formed an alliance among nations, which in its own words guaranteed, quote, the freedom and security of its members through political and military means. You know, alliances are absolutely vital to our foreign policy and our national security. And we, along with 11 other countries, signed this treaty in a time of relative peace. And over time, because of growing polarization in the Cold War, more countries joined. Greece, Turkey, and Germany joined in the 1950s, Spain in 1982, and the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland in 1999. And then from 2009 to 2020, 11 more countries joined, including Estonia, whose ambassador to the United States, Christian Preek, visited us in January for our first diplomatic discussion of the semester. And as we talked about then, and I'll say it again now because it bears repeating, only once have NATO members invoked the key guarantee of the NATO treaty, Article 5, which states that an attack on one is an attack on all. And that was, of course, in response to the terrorist attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001. Richard Haas, the former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, once said, countries can be friends, even close partners, but allies have a solemn obligation to come to one another's defense. So Finland is our friend, Finland is a close partner, but as of April 4th, 2023, Finland is a NATO ally. And I have such fond memories of sharing that day with Jarmo Sareva, Finland's Consul General in New York, who visited Chapel Hill on that historic day. And I'm delighted to welcome him back to our campus 1 year later. And the actual occasion for inviting him is this. This week, UNC Chapel Hill and the University of Helsinki are participating in the first part of an exchange on women in global security. So students from Helsinki are here with us this week. Do you guys mind raising your hands? There we are. There's our visitors. Welcome them. And they're learning about cybersecurity, emergency preparedness, nuclear security, election security, and more. And then students from Carolina will travel to Helsinki in a few weeks to complete the exchange program. And this exchange program is made possible by the U.S. Embassy in Helsinki. And it's one of the many ways that Carolina provides a rich menu of global learning opportunities to our students. I've enjoyed meeting the Finnish students this week, and I look forward to hearing from our UNC students when they return from Finland later this spring. Carolina's diplomacy initiative is another key component of my office, the Office of Global Affairs, and it helps us deliver the global guarantee. Carolina's promise to make a transformative global education available to every Tar Heel. The Diplomacy Initiative builds on UNC's standout strengths in language and area studies, including 6 area study centers recognized by the U.S. Department of Education as National Resource Centers. And when we only had 5, that was the most of any university in the American Southeast. So now we have 6, that's even more. And that includes our co-sponsor for this evening, the Center for European Studies, which we're proud to say is also a Jean Monnet Center of Excellence. The Diplomacy Initiative helps fill a gap that our students identified. Our students know that students in D.C. have easy, frequent access to foreign affairs practitioners in the world of foreign affairs, but that can feel out of reach here in North Carolina. So one way to fill that gap is providing opportunities like tonight's diplomatic discussion to engage firsthand with a foreign affairs practitioner with real-world experience tackling global challenges. I am so pleased to welcome Jarmo Sareva, the Consul General of Finland in New York, back to our campus 1 year after Finland joined NATO. Sareva is an experienced diplomat, especially when it comes to arms control. Prior to his current appointment, which began in September of 2022, he served as Finland's ambassador for cyber affairs and Finland's first ambassador for innovation. From 2006 to 2018, he served in various positions in the United Nations, both in New York and in Geneva, and including as director of the Geneva branch of the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs and the director of the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. As Consul General, he promotes Finland's commercial and cultural interests throughout the eastern United States. And previously, he served in Washington, D.C., Vienna, Austria, and Moscow. So, as all of our signs say, Finland, once again, I think for the 7th year in a row, ranks as the happiest country in the world. And it's the indicators like, public health, education, safety, peace, and happiness. So I hope we have at least a moment to explore how Finland does that. And I also hope to hear, though, principally, why in 2023, after 74 years of neutrality, Finland decided to join NATO. To unpack Finland's decision and to reflect on the past year, which also has included Sweden joining the alliance, Sareva is here with us tonight. Now, after he gives his prepared remarks, he'll take questions from the audience, and you see mics on both sides. So he'll call you up to the mics, but you'll line up there. So when he's done, he calls you up. That's where we're going to do it. We're not passing the mic around. It takes too long. We're going into the aisle, so it's a change of how we've done things. So with those instructions on how this is all going to happen, could I get you to please join me in giving a big welcome to Consul General Jarmo Sareva.
Ambassador Stevenson, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's great to be back on UNC campus here in Chapel Hill. Before going to NATO, let me say a few words about the happiest country now for 7 years in running. And let me point out one thing. These surveys were not made in November. That's the secret behind our success. But as the ambassador said, a great deal of the explanation behind Finland's sustained ranking as the happiest country in the world lies in security, a sense of personal security and security of your family. What struck me some years back when I returned after a long absence to Finland, and I didn't know this, but it still struck me, was to see 6- and 7-year-old kids taking the tram in Helsinki to school all by themselves. Our ranking is also explained by a very good work-life balance. That's actually something that brings people from other parts of the world to Finland, and they like to stay. It's also proximity to nature. Even in Helsinki, which is a rather big city, the metro area has some 1.3, 1.4 million people. You can take a bus from downtown Helsinki and be in a national park, which feels like a wilderness, in less than half an hour. Being in nature is good for you, it makes you happy, and this is really one of the explanations. It's also the fact that there's equal opportunity for all, irrespective of who you are and what is your family background. I'd like to talk about the Nordic Well-Being Society, because that's the right translation for the Swedish and Finnish words, hyvinvointivaltio and välfärdsstat. It's a well-being society that aims to provide well-being and security for all. Now, let me start my remarks on Finland and NATO. I've had a busy and inspiring day meeting with students and faculty of this excellent academic institution, as well as with Finnish business representatives and friends of Finland here in the great state of North Carolina. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. The title of this event is From Neutrality to Alliance, Finland 1 year after joining NATO. Let me start by giving some context by telling about the long arch of history, because not all of you know about it. Until 1809, Finland and Sweden, and I'm telling this because Sweden has joined NATO 4 weeks ago, we spent about 700 years together. It's Finland as an integral part of the Swedish kingdom. For most of that time, Finland formed roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of the Swedish realm. So Swedish history was largely also the history of Finland. In other words, without Finland, the history of Sweden would have been quite different. That is obviously even more so for Finland. Without Sweden, and therefore under rule first by Novgorod and then by Moscow, our history and our very identity would have been very different. It would have become a non-Western identity. It is possible that over the centuries, we would have been totally absorbed by Russia, that there would be no Finland today. When Sweden lost its position as a great power in the early 18th century, Russian pressure on Finland increased, and Russia conquered Finland in the 1808-1809 war with Sweden. The Russian emperor at that time, Alexander I, was an enlightened one, giving Finland extensive autonomy, thereby helping create the Finnish state. Finland also maintained the Lutheran religion and its own languages, Finnish and Swedish, and the Swedish laws continued to apply. The central administration was created on the top of old Swedish local and provincial administration. Finland even had its own central bank and currency, and a customs border with Russia proper. Towards the end of the 19th century, Russia began gradually to take away our liberties. We no longer felt safe, and we felt that our autonomy might not be respected and preserved. Therefore, when the opportunity rose during World War I, after the Russian Revolution, when there was chaos across the border to the east, and when Russia was weak, we used that opportunity to declare our independence. We knew then, as we know now, that our future, like our past during the hundreds of years that we had spent as part of Sweden, was with the West. This pattern has then repeated itself. I am not going to delve into the history of Finland in the interwar period, nor into how we were able to almost miraculously survive the war as a free and Western nation, albeit at great cost, nor am I going to delve into the decades that we spent living in the ominous shadow of the Soviet superpower. What I want to highlight is that when the Soviet Union broke up in 1991, when our neighbor was weak once again, we not only got rid of the bilateral security treaty framework with the Soviets, which had limited our freedom in foreign and security policy, but also decided to seek membership in the European Union. We joined the EU in 1995 together with Sweden and Austria, something that we could not have done in the glory days of the Soviet Union. This was a major step in our long quest to use Russia's weakness whenever such an opportunity would arise to expand our freedom and anchor ourselves in Western institutions. Why did we then seek to join NATO when Russia appeared to be strong, following the launch of its unprovoked, bloody, and illegal war of invasion of Ukraine? Wouldn't Russia have appeared strong and dangerous to a country that shares an 832-mile-long border with it. After all, Russia had just used as one of the pretexts for its invasion the claim that NATO was expanding to Ukraine. Here, as a side note, we have to bear in mind that NATO has not been expanding to Central and Eastern Europe. Rather, these countries have sought freely and willingly to join it for reasons which are obvious. When our then president, Sauli Niinistö, who left office just about a month ago, said on the day of the invasion, when asked by a journalist what he now thought of Russian President Vladimir Putin, he replied, and I quote, "The mask has come off and only the cold face of war is visible," end of quote. Any last vestiges of hope that Russia could play by the rules of the civilized world were now abandoned. In a matter of weeks, public opinion swayed from having been clearly against joining NATO, because Finns had believed that we could deal with Russia by ourselves, to strongly favoring it. There was a sense in the country that even if we were not in any immediate danger, Russia's military capabilities were clearly now engaged elsewhere, we would need an additional insurance policy on top of our strong national defense. In the end, the only credible insurance policy could be provided by NATO. In a somewhat counterintuitive way, Russia's aggression belied its weakness. I'm recalling the late Senator John McCain's very accurate description of Russia as a gas station masquerading as a country. Now, the invasion showed that the gas station had absolutely no intention to become a modern, rules-based, technologically advanced country where its people could pursue their and their country's happiness. Instead, the gas station had firmly chosen a dead-end path of misery at home and death and destruction abroad. As history has shown us, this is a path of weakness and eventual collapse. Finland was eventually admitted to NATO in record time. I was here, as the ambassador noted, on April the 4th last year, the day when our membership became official. And now, just less than 4 weeks ago now, on March the 7th, Sweden became NATO's 32nd member. What does this mean for Finland and its Nordic neighbors, for NATO and European security? For Finland, joining NATO was certainly easier than for Sweden. For us, military non-alignment during the Cold War had not been a choice made out of our own free will. It had rather been a matter of necessity, de facto imposed upon us. Sweden, on the other hand, had not fought a war since 1814. And for the Swedish people, neutrality, after joining the EU in 1995, military non-alignment was part of the nation's very identity. In fact, the decision to seek membership in NATO was painful for many Swedes. A decision greatly impacted and helped by Finland's own quick and determined choice in this regard. The Swedes themselves said that for once Finland was the big brother. From a Nordic point of view, the accession of Finland and Sweden to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is truly historic, because this is the first time since the dissolution of the Kalmar Union in the 16th century that the Nordic countries are formally on the same side internationally, in addition to all their social, economic, and cultural similarities. The Nordic countries all belonged to the Kalmar Union from 1397 to 1523 under the Danish monarch, although each of them kept their own laws and institutions. The union lasted until Sweden, which included at that time Finland, rebelled and became independent in 1523. And soon after, Norway sank to the status of a Danish province. Dear friends, Even as a member of NATO, the long-term foundation of Finnish foreign and security policy has remained and will remain the same. It is a foundation based on the rule of law, human rights, equality, and democracy, all key values and interests of our Western allies. For a small country, the importance of the rules-based international order is obvious. Having joined NATO, Finland participates in NATO's defense planning and military activities. Finland has integrated its defense into NATO's collective defense. This process was actually quite smooth, not least because most of the equipment of the Finnish defense forces was already NATO compatible, as were our forces' operating procedures. This was a result of sustained policies pursued since the 1990s. Our military knew it best already then. At a time when there is some concern in the US about its allies' military spending, and when some even describe European NATO members as freeloaders, I want to emphasize that Finland is a security provider. We bear our responsibility and are committed to defending the entire alliance against all threats from all directions. Finland's capabilities are strong. Finland's capabilities and strong national defense make NATO stronger. This includes conscription, which we never gave up following the end of the Cold War, unlike most Western European countries. In addition to strong defense, Finland's main assets as a member of NATO are civil preparedness and crisis resilience. Finland has a comprehensive approach to security. We include the whole of society, including the private sector, in maintaining strong resilience. In terms of sharing the burden, our defense spending in 2024 is budgeted at 2.31% of GDP, clearly above the 2% NATO gold standard. The program of our current government, which was adopted last June, includes a commitment to maintain the level of defense expenditure at no less than 2% of GDP, and the government is also seeking to commit the country to this target across future government terms. The worrisome European and global security situation, as well as the obligations associated with NATO membership, will mean increased pressure on defense spending. On acceding to NATO, Finland committed to approving 8 further treaties within 1 year of the date of accession. Those include, for example, the NATO Status of Forces Agreement and the Paris Protocol on the status of international military headquarters. In addition, Finland and the United States have negotiated on a new bilateral defense cooperation agreement. It will deepen the close cooperation between Finland and the United States in the areas of security and defense. It establishes the terms and conditions for US military presence in Finland in all security situations. The DCA, as it is known, will make it easier for the United States to support Finland, reinforcing the security of Finland as a NATO member. The agreement will also strengthen the security of the United States and other Nordic countries. And the DCA is based on the NATO Status of Forces Agreement and supplements it. Now, dear friends, it is important to note that both our accession to the alliance as well as our commitment to strengthening our defense enjoy overwhelming public support across the political spectrum, as well as among the general public. In Finland, politics ends at the water's edge. Politics ends at water's edge is a commonly used American political proverb. It means that partisan struggle should be confined to domestic politics and that a united front should be formed when dealing with foreign affairs. It was coined by Senator Arthur Vandenberg at the time of the adoption of the resolution that later became known as the Vandenberg Resolution, a landmark action that opened the way to the negotiation of the North Atlantic Treaty and the creation of NATO. And we know, sadly, that in the United States, politics doesn't end at the water's edge today. In this connection, I believe that the transatlantic relationship continues to be important to the United States. On the two sides of the pond, we share the same values and interests. The EU and the United States have the largest bilateral and investment relationship and enjoy the most integrated economic relationship in the world. According to a recent report, US-Europe trade goods hit an all-time high of $1.22 trillion last year. This was more than double the goods trade between the US and China, and US exports to Europe were also a record. Europe also became the top purchaser of US crude oil and accounted for more than 60% of American shipments abroad of liquefied natural gas. US company affiliates in Europe earned an estimated $350 billion, and European units in the US made $190 billion. So mutual interest is there. Having said that, I want to stress that it is in Europe's own interest to complement a continued US role with a stronger defense posture of our own, including higher military spending. Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine has demonstrated that NATO and the EU must strengthen their defense industrial base. A stronger Europe is in the Europeans' own interest as well as in that of the US. Russia's war of invasion has shown that history did not end with the collapse of the Soviet Union. It just decided to take a nap. An aggressive and expansionist Russia is likely to pose a threat for a long time to come. I hope I'm wrong. And Europe, being on the front lines, must rise to the occasion in defending freedom and the rules-based international order. Ukraine needs our continued and substantial support because a Russian victory would only whet Moscow's appetite. A bully stops only when stopped. Finally, I want to say a few words on Finland today, on what sets it apart. And I'd like to start by a quote from the actress Emma Thompson, just a few days ago, after she had been filming in Finland for the upcoming action thriller, The Fisherwoman. In a warm tribute to Finland and the Finnish people, she said, among other things, and I quote, "Shooting in Finland is more than the sum of its parts being ineffable, and its people being constitutionally remarkably suited to the demands of film. Filming is wildly unpredictable, messy, complex, and frustrating. Films make light of this. If the weather is wrong, they focus on what can we do, and never on what we are prevented from doing. Their attitude, at least in my experience, is born of a resolution and a resilience that I can only guess must come with the territory." End of quote. These are really wonderful words, and I believe that they do, by and large, define the character of Finland and the Finnish people. Resilience is at our core, shaped by both history and climate. And the relative lack of natural resources has created a society and culture which values education and human capital, and where the input and role of every person is needed and valued. After all, we are a big country with relatively few people. We're also a very pragmatic nation. That sense of pragmatism also enabled us to move so quickly to seek membership in NATO and to shed whatever illusions we continued to have about Russia and its intentions. We also deliver what we promise. In security matters, it means that you can count on us standing by your side with a serious determination and a no-nonsense approach. In business, it means that our companies deliver on time, on budget, and on specs. We may not be the greatest tutors of our own horn, And it means that we all too often keep our light under the bushel. And we probably need to change a bit in that regard. But because we are a serious, pragmatic, and practical people, we can still engage in a fact-based and civil political discourse among one another. And this may be one of the things that also explains the level of happiness. And this is probably one of our greatest assets today in today's world. And it also helps us withstand outside attempts to divide us. Our recent presidential elections were a victory for Finnish democracy due to the remarkably civil and constructive nature of the campaign. There was no mudslinging, no personal insults, no mis- or disinformation, or anything of that kind. On the night of the second round of the elections, when the race was decided between the two runners-up, and after the election had been called for the center-right candidate, he first went to his opponent's election headquarters to shake his hand and to thank him for a good race before actually going to his own victory party. This is the picture of Finland that I want to leave with you. Despite the fact that even in Finland, social media, even if in Finland, social media has contributed to a somewhat more polarized political landscape, we are still able to work and come to agreement together. And this is especially pronounced in the foreign and security policy realm, where politics still ends at the water's edge. Thank you so much.